great to have you with us, and this is the first night that we're doing this, and we're going to be doing as we normally have done before. We're going to be taking this a book at a time. We're starting in Genesis tonight. You have your handouts with you, and at any point, any time, don't be afraid to ask a question, okay? Because that's how we learn the best, right? That's how we learn the best. So, we're looking forward to this, and for the sake of those that are watching on the camera, you can see this in its entirety through our direct link on our website, or putting the search on the YouTube Melford Evangelical Covenant Church, and it'll come up for you, and you have it all there. And so it's there ready for you to go for each week. Now, we are going to take as many Thursday nights as this will take. We won't be doing every Thursday night because there'll be some Thursday nights that I'll be away, right? But on the nights that I am here, we'll be doing this together. We'll keep you informed as to which nights are on. And we'll continue doing this till we get to the end of the Old Testament, okay? And I know there's some others that are planning on coming out a little later on in the next successive Thursday nights. So really looking forward to this. I think it'll be really beneficial for all of us. So why don't we start with prayer, and then we will begin, all right? Father, thank you for the opportunity to be together and to learn. Father, you have preserved your word for us so that we can learn of you, your nature, your character, your love for us, and how you have provided redemption for us. I pray, as we now take the opportunity to learn, to understand the Old Testament better, that through your Spirit, you would open our eyes, open our minds, help us to understand and see how this is relevant even to us today. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, now before we get into the nitty-gritty of Genesis, I want to review with you a survey that I did a number of years ago with another church. It wasn't this church, but it was another church regarding the Old Testament and our perspectives on the Old Testament, what we thought. So, for example, the first question I asked was, when reading the Bible, which testament do you most often read? Either the Old Testament, or both, or the New Testament. And you'll see there how the Old Testament, which is this color, there it is right there. Less than 20% reading the Old Testament. Okay? Of course, almost 60% reading the New Testament. And then you have those who, well, want to say both, but yet still under 40%. In fact, just a little over 30% according to the graph. Okay? So what does that begin to tell you already? It begins to tell you that as far as the Old Testament is concerned, it's not read as often in our churches as the New Testament. Okay? Came across another question that I wanted to ask, and it was this. Roughly, when was the last time you read from the Old Testament? So not only are we seeing a trend to reading the New Testament more than the Old Testament, but now we also see some other trends with regard to, well, if you did read the Old Testament, how soon or how recent was that? Notice in this color here, currently reading, a little over 60%. Now, when we were doing the survey, guess what was happening? We were working through an Old Testament series, okay? So that was the reason for the increase in the frequency. But notice some of the other categories there. A month ago, we even had a category of 10 years ago. They couldn't remember, so they said a long time ago. Some said never, had never read the Old Testament. Okay? 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, 2 months ago. So there was a very wide gap on how recent it was since they had read the Old Testament for those who weren't currently doing that. Going to the third question now. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the Old Testament? I should maybe ask that of each of you. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you read the Old Testament?
Lots of history.
Lots of history, okay.
The beginning of everything?
The beginning of everything, okay, good.
There's lots of violence in it.
Okay, yes, there's stories of violence, and it seems to permeate throughout the entire thing, right? Okay, good. Karen, first thing comes to mind?
History.
History, okay, good. And we have several different categories of it here. Some talked about punishment, Moses, okay, Old Testament. Rules, hard to understand. Some were thinking Genesis creation, God, of course, stories. History, which stories and history are the most prominent on that, all right? You see it's just under 20%. I know it's flickering. It's just we're working on getting the projector clean yet. Fourth question. Why is the Old Testament in the Bible? Well, that was a good question. Different responses to this. Some said to show creation, inspired by God, to show development of Israel, to provide background for the New Testament. That was a good response. Okay, we can't understand the New Testament without understanding the Old Testament. Okay, so but the two most common was to show God's plan for humanity. Good, because that's what the Old Testament does. It shows God's plan. Or to show history, which that's exactly what the Old Testament does as well. And if we can get that together and we can put that history together, then we can see how the scriptures fit together, because they do. It's not just 66 individual books, but it's 66 books that God has not only written through human authors, but has also preserved for us so that we see how it all fits together. We often take a look at the Old Testament books as being separate little books. We'll see as we go through this how they all fit together, okay? So that it helps us in a better understanding. The fifth question I asked was this: on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, how would you rate the Old Testament with regard to its relevance today? Now, I'm going to ask you what you think that number would be. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, how would you rate the Old Testament regarding its relevance for today? What do you think, in my survey that I performed here, what do you think the number was that it came to?
Is that the number that the average, the norm of people would...
People in the survey, yeah, the average number that they came up with as to how relevant they felt it was for today.
I would think they thought it was about a 3.
Okay, all right. So, Clark, you were thinking 3, okay? Jean, what do you think for a
I
number?
was thinking maybe 5.
5, okay?
I'm going right between them at 4.
You're going to be 4, between at 4, okay? So the highest we got so far is 5, the lowest we have is 3. Adeline?
I would like to think it should be a 10, but I know that's not real. I'm going to go 5.
A 5, okay. You'll be pleasantly surprised, I think, with this. There was the number.
Wow.
8.9, okay? So, a little nudge, right? We'd get it to 9 out of 10, okay? So I thought that I was quite pleasantly pleased with that and a little surprised with that. But still, there is that sense that the Old Testament is still relevant for today. Even though we're talking about history that is recorded for us, that goes back thousands upon thousands of years, especially when we go back to Genesis.
Just like I talk with Christians, and they just don't see the relevance of the Old Testament.
Right. Right. They think that the Old Testament is that which is of the old ancient stories that really have nothing to do with what is shared in the New Testament, when in actual fact what we will discover is that we really don't understand the New Testament without first understanding the Old Testament. That's why we're starting here. I mean, we could do an understanding the New Testament course, right? But we have to start here if we're really going to glean some things from the New Testament, and you'll find, because this is what our next step, or what our plan is for the next step, is that once we get through the Old Testament, then the next step we will take is now understanding the New Testament.
So I'm going to hang around for a while longer, I gather.
Oh yeah. It'll be taking us a little while. Well, if you consider 66 books, let's say we won't do this probably, but let's say we covered one book each Thursday night. Okay? So now you understand what we're looking at. Okay? But you know what? As long as the Lord gives us time, we'll continue doing it, right? And that'll be a benefit for all of us. So, let's begin with Genesis, because that's the first book that we have in the Old Testament. You have received your handouts there. I even included in there on your handouts those survey results, okay? So if you want to take a look at them a little later, you can. But the first thing that I like to do with a book, in order to understand it a little better, and those of you, Gene, like you, who have taught, okay, is we understand if we can get the outline of a book, it helps us to understand it better, correct? So that's what I usually do first, and we'll be doing this first with each book that we cover. We'll talk about the outline of the book first. Now, Genesis. How many chapters in Genesis? Anyone remember? More than 10.
60 something?
Oh, you're thinking of Isaiah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're thinking of Isaiah. Isaiah has 66 chapters.
That's right.
I can cheat and tell.
You can cheat and tell me, yes, and that's fine. 50 chapters. Okay, so already we're thinking, all right, Genesis, an ancient book, takes us way back in history, right? 50 chapters. This is not going to be an easy book to understand. Anybody thinking that way right now? Probably, right?
It's not very easy.
Right. Guess what? There's an easy way of outlining this book. And what we do to outline this book is we take the characters that we are introduced to in the book, and that helps us with the outline. For example, creation. We're not introduced to any characters yet, but creation, chapter 1, that's easy to remember because I think we at least have that much understanding of what Genesis is. So chapter 1, we have creation, right? Chapters 2 through 5 now deal with the first character that we are introduced to in God's creation, and his name is Adam. And basically what Moses does is he takes chapters 2 through 5 and tells us about Adam. After Adam, we then are introduced to Noah. Remember Noah? Okay? If you're an old Bill Cosby fan from back in the 60s, you remember his sketch that he used to do about Noah and the ark, right? Chapters 6 through 11 deal with the character of Noah. What would be the next logical character after Noah? Exactly. And that's where Genesis goes next. Now, you'll notice that as the deeper we go into Genesis, the more chapters are devoted to the characters, right? Chapters 2 through 5 for Adam, chapters 6 through 11 for Noah. Abraham now, chapters 12 through to 23. Okay? Why do you think Moses would concentrate a lot of the content of his book on Abraham? What did Abraham begin?
He began with, we all became descendants.
Remember, he gave a promise to Abraham. Through your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Abraham is what we would call the patriarch, not just with regard to the Jewish race, but the patriarch with regard to how this race that God will choose specifically, it will be through the same race that Jesus will come in his earthly form. It will be through the same lineage, right? Abraham is the patriarch of all of this. Okay? So that's why Moses concentrates a good amount of content on Abraham. Then after Abraham is who? Isaac, who is the son of promise for Abraham and Sarah, right? Only a few chapters on Isaac. We don't know a lot about him other than how he is the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham and Sarah. You will have a son, right? And we know that Abraham and Sarah had a son in the old age, where it didn't seem possible that children could be born, but because God is involved, he sometimes does things in such a way that we cannot be mistaken as to who's in control. And God certainly was in control. After Isaac is Jacob. That's right. Jacob would later be known by what name? Israel. Exactly. Okay? Because Jacob would have how many sons? 12. He would have 12 sons. And it would be through those 12 sons that the tribes of Israel would be named. Right? And we'll get into that as we go further in the Old Testament. After Jacob is Joseph. And that's the last character that we are introduced to in Genesis. So now what we've done is we've taken 50 chapters And as we follow each character that we are introduced to in the first book of the Old Testament, that helps us understand what's happening in Genesis. So as you follow the line of each Bible character, that gives us an idea of what's happening in the book. Okay? Rather than trying to divide those 50 chapters down any further, I don't think it would benefit us any more. This helps us with a good bird's eye view. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so that would be the outline of Genesis. What we want to now talk about is the background of Genesis. And what we find is that the book of Genesis is part of a 5-volume book in its original. That 5-volume book we call the Pentateuch. Okay? 5, or penta, meaning 5, right? That's where we get the term penta there. It relates to a 5-volume work. And so Genesis, even though we have separated it out as one book, in reality what we're looking at is Genesis we would probably call volume 1, okay, of a 5-volume work. Okay, volume 1 of a 5-volume work. And what I've done here is I've given you a chart to help you understand how those 5 books fit together. So, for Genesis, okay, we're talking about Israel's origin in early years. We're basically talking about beginnings, correct? That's volume 1. Volume 2, of course, is Exodus. Volume 3 is Leviticus. Volume 4 is Numbers. Volume 5 is Deuteronomy. And what those 5 books will do, or what Moses does through those 5 books, is help us to understand how not only does everything begin, but by the time we get to the end of volume 5, we're ready to see God do a special work with his people, as those first 5 books have shared with us their history. Because when we get to the end of Deuteronomy, the children of Israel are getting ready to cross the river of Jordan into the promised land. Okay? So we will be covering a lot of history in a short amount of time. But let's go back to Genesis, all right? Because that's the first volume that we're going to deal with. Volume 1 of a 5-volume work. And what happens here, when we take a look now at the titles of these books, let's remember, what was the original language that the Old Testament was written in?
Hebrew.
It was Hebrew. Okay? That was the original language that the Old Testament was written in. And the titles come from the original Hebrew. And what we've done over time as we've gone into the English translations is we've come up with the names of these books based upon what the Hebrew, but not always matching what the Hebrew had. So, the Jews, for example, have always referred to the first 5 books of Scripture as the Torah, is how they pronounce that. The word we would use is Torah or law. Okay? Law would be the term that is equivalent with Torah. And you'll find in the New Testament, Jesus refers to the Bible, Jesus refers to the Old Testament how? He refers to the Old Testament as the law and the prophets. When he's talking about the law, what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Okay? Simple title that Jews have always used to refer to those first 5 books. Again, another title frequently assigned to the books, again, as we already talked about, is Pentateuch. Okay? And Pentateuch literally means 5-fold vessel. Now, there's lots of discussion as to why it would be called a 5-fold vessel. The original writings of the Old Testament would not be as we would see in our hands today, a bound, paper-bound book, right? But what was used to write on back in those days, we are understanding is scrolls, right? And the scrolls would be wrapped up when they were done. But what we believe was happening is that each of those 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, each of those scrolls had its own vessel, jar perhaps, that the scroll was put in to preserve, right? To preserve from the elements. Okay? Hence, fivefold vessel. Okay? 5 vessels, all containing those 5 books of the Old Testament. Okay? So that's why you hear Torah, that's why you hear Pentateuch as titles for these 5 books which Genesis is part of. When we talk about those 5 books, we want to talk about their unity as well, because when you take a look at all 5, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, as you take a look at the language as it's used, as it's written in those 5 books, there is both internal, okay, in the books themselves, and external, evidence outside of the writings of those books. Both internal and external evidence that supports the view that there is one author of all 5 books. Who would that author be? Moses. Okay? So this is rather remarkable when you begin to think about it a little further. If Moses is the writer of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which book does Moses come on the scene and is born? Do we remember? Because it's not Genesis.
Must be Exodus.
It's Exodus, where we are introduced to the birth of Moses.
How many years would be between Adam and Moses?
We'll get there as we go a little further. Suffice it to say, it's more than just a few years, right? and we'll get there. So understand, Moses being the author of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, especially Genesis, where Moses was not around to see all of what took place, isn't it interesting that Moses is able to write the first 50 chapters of the Old Testament and talk about what God did in the lives of individuals? Okay? So what we have happening here is Moses is able to recount for us, God leading him, of course. There's resources that Moses would have used as well in his research, okay? And we'll get there too. Where Moses, as God works with him, is able to share what happened, even though he wasn't there.
It's amazing.
It is. It is. And then Moses, then from there, after his time in Pharaoh's court and all the rest of it, we estimate that his writing of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy was much later in his life. So it's almost as if those 4 books were kind of what we would call now his memoirs, as he was writing those later on in life. Okay? So this is interesting, that there's external and internal evidence that would help us to understand that the author of the Pentateuch is indeed Moses. So let's go to this author. Let's go to this author and learn a little bit more about him. As we said, he wrote the first 5 books, so he wrote the 5 books of the law. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. In fact, it's interesting here, we come across something that causes a little question from time to time. Let's go to the very last, or not the very last, but one of the last chapters of the book of Deuteronomy. So let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 31. And I want you to notice something. Okay? Because remember, who's the author? Moses is the author. Okay? So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 31. And we're going to pick it up in verse 24. Notice what is written here. So it was, when Moses had completed writing the words of the law in the book, when they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, Take this book of the law and put it beside the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there as a witness against you. So notice what Moses is doing here. He's referring to himself by naming himself, and he tells them what to do with the book once it's finished. Okay? He wants the book of the law, those 5 books. Where does he want it to reside? In the Ark of the Covenant. Now, what's significant about the Ark of the Covenant?
isn't it?
It had the stone tablets. The Ark of the Covenant was the place where, in the tabernacle, God dwelt. But notice again what he says. Take this, verse 26, take this book of the law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there as a what?
Witness.
As a witness against you. They're going to need to be reminded, aren't they, of what God instructed them as a people. And the best place to keep it will be with the Ark of the Covenant, because that's the place, again, in the tabernacle, later on in the temple, that is the place where God dwells. Okay? It's His word. Not just Moses' word, but it's God's word. What would be the theme of Genesis? Well, basically, we would say this. The theme of Genesis is historical, it's legislative, and it's spiritual. Okay? The reason why we would say it's historical is because it helps us to understand the origins of the human race, and not only the origins of the human race, but also the origins of the Hebrew race. Okay? Because remember, it's going to be through the Hebrew race where Jesus will come in the flesh. So this book gives us the historical beginnings of these important factors. The origins of the human race. There's all kinds of questions and opinions out there as to how humans came on the earth. Guess what? Moses gives us the answer to those questions. Okay, as to how humans came upon the earth. Okay? So, it answers some of those basic questions. The reason why we would say it's a legislative theme as well is because what it does for us is it records the laws that God gave the Hebrew nation. Consider this for a moment. When God was developing the Hebrew nation, He devoted Himself to them and called them His chosen people. Were they the only race that existed in the world at that point? No, they weren't. But what was going to make this Hebrew nation very unique from all of the other nations of the world is that this would be a nation and this would be a race that would worship the one true God. All the other nations around the world at that time, the nations that these people were immersed in, worshiped many gods.
Didn't these people, before they were called out, didn't they do that also?
Yes, in fact, Abraham was an idol worshiper.
So what made them different that God chose them?
We'll see this as we get into Deuteronomy, because what Moses helps the people understand is, God didn't choose you because you had a greater, because you had a greater stature than all the other nations of the world, or that you were smarter, or that you were more talented or gifted. What Moses tells the people is the reason why God chose you is because of His love for you. So that's all we know. That's as far as we can go. With why did God choose this race? He loved them. Does that mean He hated everybody else? No. Because we know that God loves all. But what God was going to do is He was going to make Himself unique to this particular race of people, because they were going to be so unique that they would do the opposite of what the rest of the world was doing. The rest of the world was worshiping anything and everything that they get their hands on. But what this nation was going to do is they were going to worship the only one true God that would make them stand out like a sore thumb in the community and the society that they were in. So not only were they God's chosen people, but they were chosen for a purpose. They were chosen for the purpose of communicating the fact that there is only one true God, and this is the one that you need to respond to. Okay? So what happens here is that God needs to give this Hebrew nation rules and regulations whereby they know how to live in the midst of this new entity called the Israelites, because they're going to worship one true God. Well, how do we worship one true God? Well, He takes the law, and Moses is the one who is the disseminator of the law. He takes the law, and he helps the Hebrew people understand, this is how you worship God. This is what we need to do in the worship of God. This is how we will get along with each other, and this is the rules that we will use to deal with disputes that happen with us and all the rest of those things that happen because they're human beings, get into conflict. How do we deal with the conflict? God had a particular way in how they were to deal with any of the conflicts that they would deal with as people. You are going to be, as God said right from the very beginning for them, you are going to be a unique, special people that will operate and march to a whole different drummer than how the rest of the world will operate. So now we begin to get an understanding why Genesis is written. Because the beginning of not just the human race, but especially the beginning of the Hebrew race, how is this nation now going to survive in the midst of a society, in the midst of a culture that worships many gods? They're going to be unique, and they're going to spread and show the message of the one true God. Now, how's that for a calling?
A lot of responsibility.
A lot of responsibility. That's right. Any other questions on that?
I can't help but think how much this ties into our multiply that we did.
Okay. How does it tie into multiply?
I just sort of, during the multiply, it just kind of confirms
Okay.
the things that we were reading
Right.
and understanding.
Yeah.
You know, and it has, how important the Old Testament is.
Right.
You know, without it, we have no now
Mm-hmm.
understanding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it makes me think that way.
Good. Good.
Whether it's right or not, I don't know.
How about the date and place of writing? Do we know anything about when Moses wrote this book or the place where he wrote it? Well, simply put, there's no specific evidence about the setting. We don't know where he wrote it. Okay? About the closest we can come to is that we do know that he was writing during the wilderness wanderings, for example. We do know that much. But you know that during the wilderness wanderings, the nation was all over the place, right? So there's no specific place that we could say that Moses was writing. In fact, what we would probably say is that Moses was writing bits and pieces over time, okay? And came to a point where he put them in a final compilation. But that would have been a period of years that he would have done that, okay? As far as the date of his writing, the closest we can come is that we would say maybe around 1445 BC is when the final compilation came together. Okay? Not when he began to write, but when all of his writings he kind of compiled together and put it into that fivefold vessel. That would be perhaps the time period when that was written. Now, that's give or take a few years. Okay, understand? We're very broad on this dating because we just really don't know. This is about as close as we can come, we think, with some degree of confidence. Okay, and if you want to get into it, I mean, there's all kinds of books that have been written with regard to when Moses wrote it, or if it was really Moses who wrote it. And, I mean, we've been talking about some of these things for centuries in the history of the church. Suffice it to say, what we'll say here, we don't know where he wrote it, but we would date his final compilation around 1445 BC. Okay? Or BCE, I guess is the term we use now, before Common Era. Okay? Right? And so that's about as close as we can come with that. As far as the geography of Genesis, basically this map here shows you the geography that Genesis covers for us. So, to help you out here, we have the Mediterranean Sea here. So if the Mediterranean Sea is here and the Nile River is here, what area of the world is this?
Egypt.
This would be Egypt. There's the Red Sea, there's the Sea of Galilee, there's the Dead Sea. So this little sliver of land currently that is there now, that would be the nation of? Israel, yeah. We have the Persian Gulf over here. We have what we call the Mesopotamian Valley. We have those two great rivers, the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. And so this is all in the area of Iraq, Iran, right? And then in these areas here, we got Syria, right? And Jordan Yeah, Turkey and those kinds of places. So when we're taking a look, and there's the Caspian Sea over here. So when we begin to take a look at the geography of Genesis and what land area we see things happening, okay, that's really the geography here. Now that's geography just basically the first 11 chapters, okay, in Genesis. But of course we know that you know, the crossing of the Red Sea, Moses crossed the Red Sea, okay, that's all in this area here. That's basically what we're confined to. Now, something that maybe the Garden of Eden was out in this area, it's possible. We really don't know. But based upon what we can read in the text, that's about as close as we can come. So the geography of Genesis, in comparison to our world we live in today, what we know of our world today, it's really a small area of land when you get right down to it, right? But remember, all of that area of land was crossed and traversed how? Either on foot or by some type of beast of burden, be it a donkey or a camel or whatever. Okay? No interstate highways,
It's
no airports.
It's still the same today too, that whole area there is where all the different gods are worshipped
That's right.
and the wars
Yeah.
and everything.
Yeah, because we know what's happening up in this area right here between Syria, Iraq, Iran, ISIS or the Islamic State, and all of what's happening now in our current history, right? All in this area again. The war that was the brief war that happened just a few months ago between Israel and the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians and the Israelites, all in this area here. With the what was that phrase now? The Arab Spring, was it? Was it the Arab Spring? Or remember when all the unsettled events were happening in Egypt, and the overthrow of the government and all the rest of that, right? History is still happening there, even after all these years. Okay?